Well, first, I want to thank each of you for your willingness to participate in this forum, whether as a speaker, a panelist, or somebody in the audience. This couldn't happen without your participation. This is an opportunity to reshine a light and focus on Oklahoma's criminal justice system. The last 2 years has seen a tremendous fragmentation of our society here in the United States. While Oklahoma has been insulated from some of that, both the American justice system and the Oklahoma justice system have been impacted in many ways. The willingness of most decision makers to consider sweeping reform has given way to a reluctance to be seen as either joining the fray or taking sides. Efforts at systemic justice reform have been stalled. The purpose then of this forum, hopefully one of 4, is to bring focus back to justice reform. Originally, I had a very broad purpose for this forum. I wanted a comprehensive, holistic approach. As I've spoken with some of Oklahoma's leaders, that was way too broad of a purpose and a focus for today. The panelists and each of your time is extremely valuable. I don't want to waste your time or lose your attention by being too long and taking too much time to address these situations. So in revising this purpose, I've decided to follow counsel and to focus on 1 or 2 specific issues that affect Oklahomans. In narrowing that focus, the 2 topics are still broad, but narrow enough to allow a concerted effort at tackling them. Toward that end, here we are. This forum is not unique in its structure or purpose. You could say it's one of countless such type forums. I've read about similar forums or forums that claim to be about justice system. The momentum of those and other reform and policy-centered organizations does not diminish the importance of this forum. It does not negate the potential value of this forum. And it certainly does not invalidate the genuineness and seriousness of the need for this and those other forums. The only thing that can repudiate the value of civil public discourse, such as will occur in this forum today, is the failure to act on what is shared. I also want to be clear on one thing. This is not a gripe session. We want to renew a comprehensive look at Oklahoma's justice system. Our panelists are here under invitation. None of them have been compensated. They want to contribute to a conversation that is bigger than any one of us. While each recognize needed reform from an individual perspective, today is not about our personal agendas. Our willingness to engage in civil discourse in no way diminishes the passions and emotions that are attendant with so many aspects of the justice system. But at the end of the day, to make lasting and balanced change, we have to recognize that there are appropriate times within the justice system where those passions should be licensed and others when they should be restrained. I was at the state capitol last week with my daughter, Reagan, and we was in the gift shop and I saw this really expensive, heavy paperweight. And inside this glass dome was the scales of justice. Over the left scale was the word justice. Over the balance in the middle was the word equality. And over the right scale was the word mercy. As we make changes to our justice system, each of these components must be kept in view. Justice, equality, and mercy. To facilitate an orderly flow and to be respectful of every participant's time, which includes those of you in our audience, we will have a moderator and he will explain how today will move forward. Michael Carnuccio is the CEO of Salt and Light Leadership, commonly referred to as SALT, a leadership organization founded by former District Attorney Wes Lane that is seeking to impact communities, local, state, and federal. He grasped that leadership comes from many forms and has nothing to do with titles. It comes from a passion to lift up those around you. It is about leading from a gospel perspective. Many of you may know Michael. I've gotten to know him over the last year or so, and I could think of no better person to have moderate today's session than him. But before I relinquish the microphone to Michael, I want to ask you to join me as I open today in an invocation prayer. Heavenly Father, in Jesus' name, God, you know my heart and you know the hearts of every person here in this room, the panelists, the speakers, those in attendance. We want this to be about your purposes for our communities and our society. We don't want this to be about ourselves. We want this to be about change that affects every Oklahoman. Keep our hearts and our minds open. Give us clarity of thought and speech. Give us open ears. In Jesus' name, amen.
Okay. Thank you, Doug, and welcome, everyone. If I do that, can you hear me okay? All right, good. As you can tell from my last name being Italian, I will do air traffic control signals throughout the day, so the microphone could be a casualty. So we're going to leave it plugged in there. And let me start off with just a couple administrative notes for today. The first, you see a phone number up there, 405-615-2309. That is how you can text in questions throughout the conversation. We have some planned questions already addressed for panelists and our speakers, but time allowing, and especially at the end, we're planning to be able to get some questions in. Likewise, if there's something that feels long for a text and you want to jot it down on your note in break periods, please feel free to bring those notes up to me. Next, I'm going to ask our panelists and speakers, especially in the front, when you aren't speaking right now, all the mics are hot. So, meaning they're live. So if you could reach up on your mic before you speak, turn it on, but for right now, maybe turn it off if yours is on. That way, if we need to have any conversation or anything, we can just make sure the main speaker's mic is on. Always important, again, back to being Italian, there's food in the back. Snacks on the table and beverages in the cooler, and restrooms are just outside these doors. The easiest one to hit just behind that exit sign. Feel free and comfortable to get up and move around as necessary. And lastly, I would really like to thank Scissortail for their sponsorship and helping to put this together and give us all an opportunity to be here and have such an important conversation today. So about that important conversation, with my background being in politics and public policy, it's risky, Doug, to give me the microphone and just tell me I've got some time. But I'm going to keep it and kind of set the terms of the discussion today. I've always heard a good leadership style is do three things and do them well. So, and we think about the three things that we can do today, as Doug kind of walked us through there with themes and kind of narrowing that focus. If you would, at the top of your paper, write this down. What is justice? Now, I'm not going to define it for you. I want you to put that there because as the conversation goes today, you will hear many different viewpoints, many angles that will help inform how you answer that question. And one of the things that might be interesting is how you would answer that question right now. A value of a good forum like this might be how that answer may change toward the end of today, either being a little bit more concrete and informed, or maybe challenging you with a perspective that you never had before, or you never realized as we talk about what justice may be or what justice means to you. And that leads me to the second point as we think about justice in our society. What is your role? And I think you'll hear from everyone here today, and hopefully you came in with this knowledge, but I'm here to tell you, your role is not passive and just somebody else is handling that. That's for somebody else to take care of, and it will never affect me or anyone that I know. Statistically, we know that that's not true. But if we want to have a just society, as you would define it, part of the consent of the governed that we live in such a free country as this is that we participate in that process in some way, shape, or form. That can be in a volunteer role, that can be an active civil service, or that could just be in leadership and education roles in our community, at our church, or at our local schools. So I encourage you to think about what is your role and try to walk away today with a direction or a call that God might put on your heart for answering that. And lastly, the value of life. You know, we think about a lot of times we will boil conversations like this down, and many of our panelists and speakers today that are involved in the public policy process, they have to juggle the fact that it's not just the 7-second sound bites that we'll get in media, but the time that is allowed for legislative work at the local level and at the state level and even at the federal level. You really have to bring a lot of these concepts down. And sometimes we forget or we're not allowing ourselves to view the fact that there's the start of life And at some point in the middle, something happens that then brings us into this conversation and question of discussion about justice. But that's not the end of the story, right? And so then there's the rest of life. And all of that, from the beginning to the very end, factors in to this conversation that we're having today. And it factors in for everyone who is justice involved, is the term that you'll hear quite a bit today. But it also factors into everyone that's involved in the community. And so this is a conversation today about how does our community value life? And what does that mean? And what are we willing to do to ensure that every life reaches full potential? I'm here today, and you heard that I'm CEO of SALT, and I believe firmly, and the Bible tells me that every life is fearfully and wonderfully made.
Amen.
And so no matter what, it's not up to me. God created every one of you in here with a purpose and a call in your life. And if something has happened that we have done in society, or something has happened to you, or something has happened with someone else involved that has put a barrier or maybe shifted course from that, then it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we help to come back in line to achieve the full potential and the God's call on that individual's life. And so I hope as you walk away today, those three things will resonate with you. You'll have a better understanding, or maybe a better conviction of your role and where you might move forward in that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, again, using the privilege here of the microphone, it's real easy, especially when you're justice involved, to be involved for the time that you have, and then to go put your head down and go elsewhere and kind of move on. In fact, that's what we'll hear happens a lot for all of those. And there's a risk that many that are here on the stage take in speaking out or being involved or giving their personal time or opinion. And I think a great example of leadership, especially selfless leadership, is someone that's willing to put others before their own benefit. And I got to say, it would be real easy for Doug Schaefer to just go along, do his job, and let us all figure this out. But to take his time and his personal relationships to bring us together for the good of his community and for the good of all of us that can learn today, I just wanted to start with an applause and a thank you for that. And now let's get on with the program. There are many more important people up here that you need to hear from besides me. And the first, that really, the introduction here that I have to read, many of you will already know because of her decades of public service very deep in our community. But our Secretary of Public Safety, Tricia Everest, is with us here today. And I'll briefly read some of her bio points that help you understand she's not just here because of her role with the state right now. She's here because of a life of service in this field. While serving as trustee of EL and Thelma Gaylord Foundation and chair of the Inasmuch Foundation's Advisory Committee, she also plays an integral role as the founding chair of Palomar, Oklahoma City's Family Justice Center, which removes barriers for abuse victims to access the services that they need. She was also the founding chair of Remerge, which you'll hear about later on today, that diverts mothers from prison and empowers the women to build healthy foundations for themselves and their children. She holds a JD from the University of Oklahoma and an honorary doctorate from Oklahoma City University. She served Oklahoma as an assistant attorney general and chair of the Oklahoma County Criminal Justice Authority. She currently serves as the Secretary of Public Safety, where she oversees 55 state agencies. She focuses most of her time leading initiatives designed to help people find hope and purpose by creating pathways for stronger lives. Please join me in welcoming Tricia Everest.
Thank you, Michael. That was one of the nicest introductions. and it was a good reminder as well that we each do have our pathway. And I really loved your introduction and want to thank Doug Schaefer for bringing us together. When he mentioned you could go on and do anything that you would want to do or be able to, I don't know, just work or take care of things, it occurred to me that I don't think that's true. Because once I see the light of being able to know that we can be a part of something bigger than us, then I couldn't imagine not going forth each day wanting to be something bigger than not. And being able to be involved with individuals and to know that I know or have met or have worked with or have cheered on and been a part of, most people on this panel or on this stage, tells me I'm doing something right. So I better just show up, keep letting God lead the way, and be in the right rooms. There's, as also noted, there are so many different aspects to this, but the mere fact that we are all in this room now, we have local, we have all the way to our federal partners and everything in between. It is really important to know, from my perspective, that we are better together. You know, prisons, you know, generally speaking, in the 1950s, across the nation, we closed down about 500,000 psychiatric hospitals or asylum beds. Shortly thereafter, the prison system shot up. You all can do the math. This isn't about that time period, but there could be a correlation. And then somewhere in there, generally speaking, I think there were a lot of laws created to justify what we were doing when we were shifting the individuals from one area into another. And that for public safety, which is paramount to me, that we are all safe to ourselves, that I'm no danger to myself or to others. But then how do we adequately recognize that? We went through a number of years and decades. We created economic drivers in rural America by situating the prisons in different areas. And just by sheer nature, no fault of anyone's necessarily, I believe, in my opinion, that we had kind of a concept of law and order. As a good social worker I know that's moved on from Department of Corrections once told me that it's always been a cops and robbers system, not a people and people system. And that the sense of how much priorities or funding went into the prison system, that it was more, and I mean this very lightly and nicely, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone along the line, that we do a lot of warehousing. That when we come up through the system, that we've had lots of individuals that have come in, whether it be through ministry and different programs, and we have many people that work for the state of Oklahoma at each level of the state, and within the systems and volunteers that come into the Department of Corrections over the years, and working with individuals because they do recognize that hope and that humanity and that purpose. Generally, though, until recently, but as I stand here now, I'm telling you that tide has changed. Because of the works of the people that are sitting up here, the ones that are sitting out here, and many of your friends and partners and colleagues know, we have absolutely changed it. When Doug and I met and discussed this, there's the question about criminal justice reform, and I am just all about community reform, because now it's just changing the whole concept. When we're looking at humans to humans, then that's just reforming the way that we look, and that's kind of like the wake up every day, that once we see a light, it's too hard to turn that light off. And I do believe that we have made significant strides. As a state, the state has been a good example to the nation. You know, when you start out being the number one incarcerator, you get a lot of people paying attention, but they're also going to be paying attention to what we have the opportunity of doing right and of changing and becoming a gold standard. In 2019, Governor Stitt formed a Restore Task Force. He wanted to do a dive into the criminal justice reform. There were a few key components that will probably come out in the next year that were focused, but we had 6 areas of focus, and each of the stakeholders came together. And I was very honored to serve as chair of that Restore Task Force. So we had a member of the House of Representatives, legislature. We had law enforcement specialist, a member of the victims representing victims. We had OJA, the Juvenile Affairs, DHS, someone from the courts. We had the judiciary, the district attorneys, the public defenders, the indigent defense system, and countless more. Any aspect of state leadership, Department of Corrections, that touched justice-involved people was part of this task force. And for several months, we did nothing but listen. We listened to the people that are actually impacted by those that we serve. We listen to each other. We listen to probation officers, mental health experts, those that their customers, their consumers, however you want to phrase it. We went into juvenile centers. We went into state prisons, male and female. We looked at ministry programs. We went in the hardcore of just listening. And what that really does was twofold. One, it brings all the stakeholders to the same table. I call it open air accountability. When everyone is sitting at the same table, it's a lot harder to make policies based on your own pockets of influence, because then it's a lot easier to keep it, not necessarily, I'm going to use that warehousing term, but it's shuffling papers. It's numbers on a paper. It's not humanizing. So we think but when you have everyone at the table, it's a lot easier to describe, well, why couldn't we do X? Because now we have each side talking to each other, open air accountability. The things that we learned in the Restore Task Force, one of the simplest ones, because we do have limited time and many great voices, was basically the pipeline to prison. We absolutely know that in the state of Oklahoma, for most people, it's hard to get into prison, but it sure is easy to come back. We have not looked at a priority of how we help prevent the up of the river or the return to the same watering hole. And that when you look at the full pipeline of prison, we recognize, for the most part, most things happened that were unaddressed trauma. So something happened to an individual somewhere between 4 and 7 years old. There was no intervention. They start hitting puberty and they start acting out. Once again, no intervention. No one recognized these signs. No one was able to come in earlier. Later, into the teenage years, some people are just labeled. Some drop out. Some think it's just their destiny. By late teens, early 20s, they start having consequences. And now it's deemed too late. You know, I've heard it phrased before, we can help the 5-year-old, or we can wait until they're 20 and lock them up and say we're tough on crime. But with a positive intervention somewhere in between and going up earlier. So I always say, like, if you get to a county jail, I learned this from Chief Gibson sitting below me when he was sheriff of Cleveland County, but I hold hard to it when I was with Oklahoma County and as a state. If we can't divert them ahead of time and someone makes it to a county jail, then it is absolutely our responsibility that we make it a positive interruption in their life so they don't come back to the front doors. The cost to the system, you know, knowing where individuals are coming from and the adversity that we could address earlier will dramatically lower incarceration and dramatically improve all of our health outcomes, our education, our entrepreneurs, our innovation, you name it. It's really just, since it's predictable behavior, it's a matter of priorities and resources. Now, on the other side of what we can do, from my perspective of the state, and recognizing that we're all standing here together is really looking at what those barriers are. Having served the counties and working with elders, the cost that we have when we let individuals out of our state hospitality or custody without any type of a plan is so much more dramatic onto the counties they go back to and to the regions they go back to. And that's often, I don't think that's paid enough attention. Because if we don't address what's going on and help revert that, then individuals are going back to the counties or the areas that they came from. And, you know, frankly, half the town remembers and is mad at them, and the other half of the town is sitting on a street corner waiting for them to come back. We have not made any interruption. And the cost to that county and to those regions and to those jails for the habitual offending could be a whole nother talk. I can tell you from countless the statistics and numbers of what that is to our counties. So I am looking at a state that is willing to not only work together, we have all these different individuals, that open air accountability. One of the pillars that we have from the state side is that if we have to get to Department of Corrections, that at the point of sentencing, we already have a plan for reentry. And that encompasses changing all sorts of barriers. And that means coming in a lot earlier from our civic friends, the commerce and others. So we are humanizing. It's a lot different once we start looking at who we're talking about. There's an offender. Why did that person offend? How can we best serve that purpose to come out and to be a contributing member of society? So hopefully, I am hopeful is what I meant, not hopefully, but I am hopeful that that is where we are as a state. In Oklahoma County, as one of the next speakers comes up, that open air accountability, I have to say that when we started the Reemerge program in 2010, the Oklahoma women were the number one incarcerators of women. And Chris Steele and Todd Lamb worked together, and we were able to form public-private partnerships in our two largest counties, Tulsa and Oklahoma County, and be able to address the female incarceration. What eventually drew out of that was the Reemerge program that you'll hear about. And most people don't often talk about the first part, but I want you to know as an investor and as someone who was on the ground floor, we had to operate, even though we had 25 agencies come together to create the plan of what would work. We had that open air accountability, all buy-in. But if we told the general public just 11 years ago, just 10 years ago, even 9, that we were diverting mothers from prison, it might have stopped in its tracks, because the state of Oklahoma was not ready to think about people in prison as our neighbors, as our church partners, as the people who send their kids to the same school I go to. We weren't ready to personalize the system. We had to wait until there were certain successes, and then you see individuals that stand before podiums, and you see individuals that walk amongst us, and never in your wildest dreams would you know what their lives were like before. And thanks to all of those things and bringing people together to the table, we are making a difference. And I appreciate you all and honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for that, those opening remarks and really setting the tone for a great conversation today. We're going to move to our first panel discussion. The panelists join me here. You have their, I think, some of their bios and description as you see before you, but I'd like to introduce each individually before I ask the first question. Christy Jester. Christy is a mother of 2 amazing and resilient sons, Christian, 19, and Corbin, 15. She has been accepted into the Center for Social Innovation program and will be participating in the cohort starting August 16th of this year. She is a graduate of Remerge, branch 15, and Hope House programs, and she has 5.5 years of sobriety. Please welcome Christy. Roxanne Viescas. Roxanne is a peer recovery support specialist at Remerge, a diversion program for moms here in Oklahoma City that you've heard about. She is a justice-involved mother of 3 kids, 18, 16, and 15 years old, and 1 grandbaby on the way. Please help me welcome Roxana. Wayne Easter. From the age of 19 until his release at age 50, Wayne spent his formative years serving a life-term prison sentence in Oklahoma's medium and maximum security prisons for first-degree felony murder. Wayne has been out of prison since 2011 and is serving life on parole. He is the facilities manager for Scissortail Waste Solutions here in Oklahoma City, and he also serves his church, Sunny Lane Community Church, in a facilities capacity. Please welcome Wayne Easter. And Doug Schaefer. From the age of 19 until his release at age 40, Doug spent his formative years serving a 60-year prison sentence in Oklahoma's medium and maximum security prisons for drug theft and second felony degree murder charge. Doug completed numerous programs while incarcerated, including 3 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree. While incarcerated, he facilitated dozens of small groups covering personal discipleship, addiction, traumatic past, counseling, and a host of others. He utilized the Right Step program, and he wrote and facilitated peer-to-peer training programs at the Oklahoma State Reformatory, as well as taught the Department of Corrections Thinking for a Change program. He's a certified teacher and a graduate of the Evangelical Training Association's 4-tiered Christian leadership program. While in prison, Doug assisted in the design and delivery of multiple career tech programs at a variety of correctional facilities. Doug even delivered a teaching the incarcerating class for the university students maintaining their career tech certification CEUs. Doug has been out of prison since 2011 and remains on parole until September 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, Doug Schaefer. Okay, so the topic of this panel, what does your journey through the justice system look like? And so I'd like to start here. I'm going to start on my right, ladies first, and ask the question that I'll come through all of you all. So Roxana, could you look back over your life and identify, say, a starting point for your journey toward your involvement now in the justice system?
I can say that it was survival, trying to support 3 children being a single parent?
Same question, Christy.
For me, I was a freshman at OU, and I just got in with the wrong crowd and started using drugs, and liked the attention that I got from that group of people, and so that was the beginning of mine.
And we got a note here, so I'm going to ask as we go through on questions, maybe if you could bring it right up or maybe pull the microphone off so everyone in the back can hear. Wayne, same question for you. As we look back over your life, what is the starting point, you would say?
The starting point for me was receiving different friends. But I also didn't have the knowledge that I had the absence of God in my life. So when you have the absence of God in your life, you basically live in a city without walls. So, but my answer would be the surrounding friends that I had.
Doug, when you look back, what was the starting point for your journey toward the justice system?
For me, it was poor relationships with my parents. My father and I were really close. So when he did wrong, I wanted to be his shadow. So I didn't have that father parental figure that I needed. And when he failed, there was nothing from society that could step in that gap and kind of shore that need up. So I just followed in his footsteps and became a better criminal than he was.
So Doug, as we go from that point, now let's talk about when you started preparing for release. What was that like, and when did you start preparing for release?
When I was arrested on my murder conviction in December 2nd of 1990, after a year in the county jail, and when I went to prison, I had no hope, and I had given up that I was ever even going to get out of prison. So I became a convict. And about a year after I was in, I tried to stab a guy over a stupid fight on the baseball field. And I was placed in solitary confinement. And while I was in confinement, I'd smuggled in marijuana. I was high inside of a solitary confinement cell. And I picked up this magazine out of complete boredom and just read something that I already knew, and that was that God was pursuing me. And in that moment in my prison cell in solitary confinement, I just surrendered my life and I said, God, everything I have ever touched, I have screwed up. I've hurt everybody that's ever loved me. I'm never getting out of this place, but if you can do anything with me in here, here I am.
Wayne, when would you say that you started preparing for release?
Actually, I didn't ever think I was going to get out because I was given a 30-year sentence first. Then I had a life sentence. So I had to complete both of them. So my mentality was I wasn't getting out. So, but it's interesting about anybody that ever been to a prison or from the outside. When you go to a prison, you'll see gates. And on those gates, you'll see razor wire. You'll also see a sensor on the gate. They have a man in the tower. They got a man driving around the prison. So with all that security, somehow this man named Jesus Christ got through there. And then I got the mentality that I got hope. The hope started laying the foundation. So, but to tell you the truth, I didn't ever think I was going to get out, but God is God.
Christy, let me ask you, what threatened your success the most through the diversionary process?
Well, when I was in Remerge, when I started, I would say that I jumped in with both feet and both arms because I was in my active addiction for 21 years, my whole adult life. And I was just really tired of that life. And the Lord had me go through the front doors with a bounty hunter with no handcuffs on my hands. And that's when I knew that it was God that was intervening with my life. And so I think the biggest struggle I had, which wasn't for success, but just the biggest struggle that really hurt my heart was I went through all 3 of those programs I said that I graduated from before I even got my sons back. So I had a lot of work to do, and God just made sure that I stayed centered on myself.
Wow. Roxana, let me ask you the same question about what threatened success the most for you?
Well, the first 90 days of remerge, you're not allowed, they don't have housing for women and their children. You do a 90-day rehab. And in that process, 40 days into my program, I had my kids in a home that they were going to take care of them, but then they no longer could take care of them and they were going to give them to DHS. And in that moment, I left and was AWOL for 38 days until I got caught with my kids. So that was the most difficult part for me, was being away from my kids. I've been in addiction for 21 years in drugs and gangs, and I had dragged my kids along with me, but it was very hard for me to let them go, them 90 days. That was the hardest struggle for me.
Were there, let me stay here with another question, and gentlemen, I'll come back to you in a minute, but what other struggles might have come up throughout from the time that you initially became justice involved through even today?
Well, one of the struggles, the biggest struggle was having the support, having somebody there. Like Remerge, they provide housing. They give us resources for mental health, for addiction. They connect us with everything possible, education. Without Remerge giving me that, I wouldn't be here today. I would definitely be in prison. My kids would be the next drug dealers, I'm sure. And I wouldn't be who I am today because they took their time and offered. I wouldn't have been able to go to school. And one of the reasons why I couldn't pay for rent or do anything was because I was trying to sell drugs. I couldn't go to school because I had to make sure that I was coming up with money for rent. So I was always in a hole trying to dig myself out. But the moment that I got into Remerge, they literally took their time with me, 2.5 years, to help me get to where I am today.
Christy, same question. Talk about some other struggles, maybe from back, like you just mentioned, all the way through today.
Yeah, for sure. Well, with me, for the 21 years that I used, 16 of the years I used to die. I had absolutely no self-worth. I felt like my kids deserved a better mother than me. My mother deserved a better daughter than me. My sisters deserved a better sister. And so I had absolutely no self-worth. And so the struggle going in and through my addiction was that I had no community outside of my very loving but very dysfunctional family. And so I used to just pray for something. And then the Lord provided me with Remerge. And actually, most people have to wait 30 days, but the Lord was so intense about me getting into the program, it only took 3 days for them to come get me. So that's when I really knew, and I jumped in. But like a struggle with the justice system itself is like, with Remerge, like she said, you know, they help you get help with your warrants. They help get you back, you know, in the justice system on good graces. And they do help you get mentally and emotionally and physically fit. I hadn't been to the doctor. I found out I had hepatitis C. I have been now cured from that. And they were the beginning of starting that cure, of getting that restoration. I really held on to the, verse, Joel 2:25, which says the Lord will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. And he did it all the way down to my health. So I'm just very blessed.
Wayne, you mentioned a second ago that you never really thought about release. And
No.
so my question is, once release came, what were the struggles then?
Well, first of all, being confined for 30 years and I get out, the world went and got computerized. So when I went to seek for employment, let's just say, I'm gonna give you 2 examples. I went to McDonald's and went to fill out an application and it was on a computer screen. So I don't even know really how to turn on a computer at that time. So I was asking the lady question, how you do this? And she was helping me and she got frustrated. So I just left. So computerized, I was way behind on that. But then here's an interesting story. I went to another fast food, which was Church's Chicken. They hired me. I filled out the deal. I told him I've been in, and he said, come back tomorrow, you can start. Came back the next day, and he said, we can't hire you. And I said, well, why not? He said, because we have more than $50 in the cash register. And I'm thinking, I said, okay. And so I left and I sat in my truck for a minute and I'm thinking, okay, they got my phone number, address, social security number, and they talking about some 50. So when people or businesses see that you've been in and what you've been in for, that rejection is kind of hard to get a job. So those are the two struggles that I went through.
Doug, same question for you. Once release came, what struggles came with it?
Two are probably paramount for me. One is the same as Wayne, was the employment bias. Having a different background than Wayne and significant education and career tech training. Even when I was the most qualified candidate for a role, we could discuss that role all the way through the hiring process. Once it got to a legal division for risk management, an offer would be withdrawn for no reason other than that I have a background, even if the background wasn't functionally relevant to the job. And I get that we don't want child molesters working in daycares or drug addicts working in pharmacies or bank robbers working in banks. But if the background of an individual is not relevant to the job function, it shouldn't be a barrier to employment. But it is, and I understand the reasons why. There's significant bias in our communities for the second chance for the justice-involved people. But we need guidance from the decision makers and the stakeholders that can make those decisions to kind of protect people trying to. If you want me to be your good neighbor, help me be a good neighbor. Don't box me in to where I have no choices but to return to what I once was. So that was probably the most important. But there was also a communication barrier. My wife can attest to this. Everything is, when I was in prison and out of prison, everything was a conflict or a challenge. In prison, you learn to watch your back, take everything, be the bull, always grab the bull by the horn. You be the initiator of everything. Never make the second punch, always be the first. So everything in my life was a challenge. And one day I got mad at my daughter over something. And I didn't realize that I had this rage look on my face and in my voice. And it scared my daughter. And my wife took me into a room and said, Doug, you're not in prison anymore. So I needed, help learning how to communicate again and to confront myself and the things that I had taught myself and that prison had taught me, I had to unlearn. And I get to teach a class in the Center for Social Innovation on communication, on recognizing those thinking patterns. But people coming out need help, sometimes help that they don't even realize that they need. And for me, it was communication and employment bias.
Doug, keep the microphone. I've got two more questions left for each of you all, and then we'll have a break coming up. Doug, stay there on this topic of struggles. So you have now been out of prison for 10 years, right? More than 10 years. So what are the struggles like now? What struggles exist now that maybe are different from before?
Really not too many. I mean, the struggles, even now, 10 years later, are still the same. I'm just more aware of who I am. That helps me relate to people, to communicate to people, to overcome some challenges people don't even know that I have. I was the HOA president for my community for 4 years. And the board made a decision that affected one homeowner. So that homeowner did a background check on me and put together a packet of information about my background. I went door to door saying that I was a danger to the community. I was lowering property values. And I've been out 10 years at this point and working on my doctorate degree and involved in the community. But I was a danger to this community just because I made a decision that they didn't like. And the social media, news articles, all that stuff's always going to be out there. It was 30 years ago. That's not who I am today. That's not who I'd been for the 4 years. But that bias, you never being able to overcome something that you once did. And I don't diminish what I did when I say that. What I did, I can never, God knows I would change it if I could. But this is 30 years later. And if you want me to be a good neighbor, help me be a good neighbor. Don't try to ruin my life or attack my daughter or my wife because you're mad at me.
Wayne, same question. Here we are 10 years later. What struggles exist now?
10 years, 10 years later, I still computers. Yeah, I have, if you look at I have a flip phone. And when people see that, they like, huh? Yeah, flip phone. And now I've been, Mr. Schaefer here been trying to help me move off into that, but that Zing thing and face page, open book or whatever, giggle. So I'm still stuck in, I'll say I'm still stuck in the 70s. And that's cool, but I'm still stuck. I'm stuck in a lot of places, but I'm surrounded, especially at my job. I got two wonderful individuals that's over me, and but mainly, if you that's where I'm stuck at, is that computer thing.
Christy, let me ask you: when you began the diversion process, what help did you need the most then, or what was something that we all should know now for someone going through? What help is needed?
Well, like Roxana said, they put you in treatment for the first 90 days. And in that treatment, I was able to get reconnected with God through a woman named Miss Sina Masterson. And I was able to get resaved and actually baptized the day before I got out of the treatment center. So I started my journey, with a fresh start and with open eyes. And so, and then like the housing is an issue. Well, because you can either go, you have to have sober living after the treatment center. And so I wanted to sober living that was faith-based. And that's why I went to Branch 15. But just like I said, the active warrants that I had, they helped, get those diminished or just, under control, I guess you could say, and actually put me back in good graces with them so I could end up paying them off. Mentally, especially like they give you, mentally was a huge part for me. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. Was because I had a lot of trauma, a lot of sexual abuse, a lot of domestic violence all throughout that 21 years of because I wanted attention and I wanted to be loved. And so I would sacrifice myself in every way possible that you can imagine just to be able to feel like I was wanted or needed. And so they helped me to find my self-worth in Christ and to find my self-worth in being a mother and in being a woman in recovery, a woman in Christ. Reemerge really isn't faith-based, but they helped me get connected with the ones that helped me reestablish my worth in Christ. So that was the best part.
Roxana, how about you thinking about help?
Well, I just want to add, in 2012, I went to prison prior to going to Reemerge. When I went to prison, the only thing it taught me was how to be a better criminal and how to meet more criminals and how to interact in that environment. In 2016, when I joined Reemerge, what the struggles was for what I needed to begin the diversion program, it was how the daily steps of like how to live life normal, how to live life without being on a substance, how to face daily functions, how to even be a mother.
Last question for all of you all, and we'll stay here again, ladies first. But as we think about what I started with in totality of life, and we've gone through this program here in your story, what about today? What ongoing help do you see as essential to your continued success that we might understand better today?
Just having the continued resources, mental health, recovery meetings, having clinics for low income, because we still face just because I have my life together doesn't mean that I have money. So being a single parent, definitely all the resources that it's been there since day one is very vital to be able to help me stay safe.
Christy, how about you?
Well, for me, it's the community because they have a RCC meeting, which is Reemerge Continue Care, and that is detrimental to my recovery and everything. Community is key. But also I agree with Roxana on the fact that like all of the resources and all of the things that they are allowed to get and utilize in the program, we're allowed to have after we graduate as well. Like as far as legal aid, flex funds, if there becomes a time. I always called them my reparents. So like anything that you would go ask your parents, it's something that they are very, very, they're very helping.
Wayne, besides technology, although I think you're probably a lot happier than most of us not dealing with this, but Wayne, what would you say is the most help that you need or maybe you could use right now?
I think, is this on?
Yep.
Okay. So, I isolate myself. I don't run with nobody. And that's to me, I need help in that area there because in prison you have to kind of surround yourself and isolate yourself. And I haven't broke that yet. I'm still just hands off because of my background. I can't reveal myself or who I am because if once somebody hears that you're in prison, I can become a target easy.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore I back off and not how you doing and keep going rather than find out who this person is and share my story. Maybe I can help them, but that's probably one of my biggest struggle there. Yeah.
Doug?
Well, I'll summarize what Wayne said, and that's opportunities to develop quality relationships with people. Every good job that I've had since I've been out of prison has been because I knew somebody in the church. I think that people come out of prison and they don't have roots or connections to the community that they're going into that are positive. So they don't have meaningful relationships or mentors that can show them what is appropriate behavior. How do you become a good citizen? How do you join society again in a productive and positive way? So we need opportunities, both before and after, to develop quality and meaningful relationships with other men in an appropriate context.
I want to thank all of the panelists for starting us off in such a powerful way today and for your transparency and honesty and candor that really set the tone for the conversation. And I think I speak on behalf of the rest of the room that we're all better off for it. And so please join me in giving a round of applause for our panelists today.